For those of you who've been here, you know what we do in Pasha. I choose something from the Pasha and I talk about it. And what I chose to talk about is the creation of man, Adam and Chava. I want to talk you through what says in Chazal and what says in Chassidus about the uniqueness of the creation of Adam and Ish. Okay, Adam Ish means Adam and Chava. Number one, we say in the Lachadoidi, Soif Maisa b'machashavat chila. That means the last thing that Hashem did is the first thing that He thought about. Soif Maisa, the final act of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'machashavat chila is the initial thought of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means the last thing Hashem created when He created the world was He created man. He created human beings. The last thing the Eibishter made was people. Why? Because that was the first thing Eibishter contemplated, the first thing Hashem considered, the first thing Hashem thought about. Since He thought about it first, therefore He made it last. In other words, why did Hashem make the world? For people. The people appear last. Since they're the purpose, Hashem prepares the whole world first, and then He brings people into it, like it says in Chazal, that people should come into the world, man and woman should come into the world and find it the Shulchan Aruch. You want to walk into the world, and the world is set. It's prepared for humankind. So the last thing the Eibishter made was people, because this is the reason the Eibishter made the world. Now, just a thought on science. I don't want to go in that direction. Scientists look at the universe and they see how massive it is. Right? The universe from end to end is almost 30 billion light years across in every direction, which is so incredibly expansive and massive. It's unbelievable. You have no idea how many zeros that is. It's an extraordinarily expansive universe. And what's the Earth? It's not even a speck. It's a speck of a speck of a speck. Relative to the size of the universe, the Earth is like an electron, or even smaller. It's so insignificant. So when scientists look at the universe and look at the Earth, they say, no big deal. And therefore, they don't understand why Torah, the word that they use, they don't use the word Torah, they use the word religion, makes such a big deal out of man and the earth, and that there was revelation here. We're just one speck. We're one planet around one star. It is in one constellation, which is in one galaxy where there's billions of them. So again, I don't want to give you a long derasha. I just want to speak to a very simple idea. When Torah looks at the universe, it is much more impressed by the concept of life than by the concept of matter. And the meaning of the word life in its most basic level is order. Matter, material, physical things are chaotic. They come together in a random and an arbitrary way. Living things, the meaning of an organism, of an organized entity, is that it has many pieces that fit together in an incredibly precise way that expresses life. And of course, you understand that Torah teaches us, and I think it's common sense, even though there's a big debate about it, that in order for there to be life, there has to be something which is called a soul. A living thing, even an insect, is not living because its molecules are organized in a certain way. There's a nefesh, there's a neshama, there's the chayas. The reason living things are as organized as they are is because there's a neshama inside. So when you look at the massive universe, you're looking at a lot of, for lack of words, dead things. They're doimen. They're looking all over the universe to try to find life on other planets, trying to find life on what they call exoplanets, planets revolving around other stars. They're having a very, very hard time. They keep on flip-flopping whether it's very likely or it's not unlikely or it's almost not likely and so on and so forth. But on this earth, there's not only life. There's complex life. And there is intelligent life. So the Torah's vantage, when Torah looks at the universe, it says, okay, it's very big. So God is very great. They can make big things. The thing that's most impressive about the Eibishter's creation are not the biggest things, but to use the words of the Chumash, those things that are the most like God. And in the universe, this is man. Adam was created, Adam Le'elyon, in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rambam, as a philosopher, will tell you that what does it mean in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm not going to explain to you what this means. I'm just going to tell you the facts. In the Rambam's mind, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is seichel, is abstract reason, is absolute logic. Human beings were given the gift of logic, absolute logic. Kabbalah and Chassidus have much more sophisticated ideas of what the Elokus is, and therefore what it means that a human being is created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They talk about Esesphiris, they talk about Atzilus, they talk about Eskalus, they talk about Tikkun, and ultimately a human being is in infinity. A human being's order, the potential of a human being is to express infinity. Therefore, the size of the person, how physically large he is, relative to the universe is not the issue. It's how deep the level of his neshama and his nefesh is. This is what I just said is common sense. What I just said I think you all know, but I nevertheless want to articulate it. This is the meaning of Soif Ma'aseh B'Chashav V'Tchila. The last thing that the Eibishter made is the reason for everything. Because human beings, as small as they are the most amazing creation within the entire universe. Nothing even comes close. Because the Eibishter made them to be, quote, in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However we understand precisely what that means and to whatever extent that is, but nevertheless, this is what human beings are. Human beings are in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the last thing the Eibishter made was people. There's another pasuk which supports what I just said. I quoted the L'chadoidi, Seif Ma'aseh Machshava Tchila. There's another pasuk which says what I just said. That's a pasuk in Kapitel Kuf Mems, or Kuf Lametes, Psalm 139, Tillim, I think it is. It says in the beginning of that kapitel, there's a very special kapitel, and people should say it every day, because there's a lot of very important stuff. One of the things it says in that kapitel is, Ochoir v'kedem tzartoni. Man says, human beings say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ochoir, last, v'kedem, and first, tzartoni, you formed us. Here's a pasuk in Tanakh, which seems to say the same thing that's written in the Siddur from Rav Shlomo Alkabetz and the L'chadoidi, but the pasuk encompasses much, much more. The pasuk encompasses much, much more, and I'll tell you how. The chronology, the timeline is people were created last. That's what it says in Siddur. What the pasuk is saying is that not only were people thought about first and created last, but the choices that people make determine whether they're lower than the lowest creation or higher than the highest creation. Achei means he made us both first and last. If we exercise our humanity, if we live in the way the Eibishter intended us to live, and radiate through our choices and through our self-refinement the idea that we're in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the Lashon HaMedrash is, we're higher than the Malach. But we also have the free will and the ingenuity and the initiative and the skill to use all of the gifts Hashem gave us to live like animals. When human beings choose to live like animals, they're lower than any animal. In the words of the Gemara, afilu yitosh kavmach, even the mosquito, even a gnat, it's an insect, it's a bug that does not excrete, it doesn't go to the bathroom. The only way this animal gives anything to the universe is when it dies. The Eibishter made everybody a mashpia makabel. Everybody takes and everybody gives. Now you don't think, that people, what creations dispose of in the equivalent of a latrine, that means a bathroom, is very useful. But one person's waste, one creation's waste is another person's life. An animal that takes and doesn't give represents the most selfish, the most lowly, the most separated from its environment creature. And the Chazal say, the Gemara says, it's mentioned in Tanya chapter 24, Perek Chav Daled, that a person who's choosing wrong is lower, is less, is after this creation that's so selfish that as long as it is alive, it doesn't even excrete, it doesn't even produce waste. So, Achei Temimim doesn't only mean Hashem thought about us first, and He created us last, but He actually gave us the prospect, the options of being the greatest of the worst. A human being can be higher than the highest angel, and there are such people, and a human being can be lower than the lowest animal, and unfortunately, we know of such people as well. This is why the pasuk Achei v'kedem tzartoni encompasses more than the Siddur. The Siddur simply says He thought about us first and He made us last. The pasuk is saying is He made us in such a way that we choose whether we're the first or the last. And then there's a third dimension. This is in the Teireh Parashat Bereishis. And the third dimension is, so the fascinating idea that when the Eibishter created all creations, He didn't create the body separate and the soul separate. He spoke and they came into being organic. Right? The first living things, by our definition of living, we can debate this. Darizal talks about this. I think it's even in today's Chitas and Tanya. The most basic living things, as is identified by science, are plants, grasses, trees, grains, corn. When the Eibishter said, Tacha Oretz Desha, Eitz Pri, Eitz Pri Lemine, so the world produced a blanket of grass. That's what the Chumash Rashi describes it. The entire earth was covered with vegetation. There wasn't a spot on the world that wasn't covered with grass, or trees, or foliage of some sort. Hashem didn't make the outline of trees and then inject a neshama into them. He made living trees. There never was a time that the tree was not alive. And if I may add, people are not aware of this so much, many, many, many trees, especially trees that produce fruit and so on and so forth, have the equivalent of zachar and nekeva, the equivalent of male and female. You may have heard about the term to pollinate, pollinators, because a lot of trees need two, a zachar and a nekeva, to produce viable fruit, or even to produce another tree or another plant, and so on and so forth. The Eibishter made the zachar and the nekeva together, or made them at the same time, alive. Hashem blanketed the earth with vegetation and with trees and with all different kinds of plants. There was never a moment that there was the body of the tree without the neshama of the tree. This is on Tuesday, right? Then on Wednesday, the Eibishter created the birds, the fish, and on Thursday, the Eibishter created the birds, and on Friday, the Eibishter created the animals. All of the living things that Hashem made followed this basic design. Hashem made living creatures. There never was such a thing as a clay fish that Hashem introduced life to it, or a clay bird, or a clay animal, or a clay reptile, or a clay amphibian, that the Eibishter injected life into. Every living thing, even insects, were made alive, with the exception of man. That's another pasuk in the same Kuf Lamites. Golmi ro'u einecha. I'm quoting the kapitel, and I may be wrong, but that's how I remember. Golmi ro'u einecha means Hashem made us. Forgive me for using the example, like the Maharal made the Goylem. He took clay and he gave it a shape. Right? Achei Temimim is pasuk hey. Golmi ro'u einecha is pasuk tezayin. It's Psalm 139, kapitel Kuf Lamites. It's a kapitel that's really worth taking a look at. It's just really wonderful. Hashem took earth, right? If you're familiar with Rashi, that Hashem made rain twice. The first time Hashem made rain, He made just enough rain to produce mud. Then He mixed the water and the earth together and produced mud. And for that mud, He made the shape of a man. And the man was laying on the ground, like a piece, like a clay mannequin, like a statue. And vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, Hashem blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man stood up. And when man stood up, and he looked around at the Eibishter's world, he began to ask Hashem for all the brachas, and then it rained, and all the grasses, and all the sedges, and all the trees, and all the grains grew out of the ground as a result of the Adam ayin lavidas ha'adam. A man had to ask for rain in order for things to grow. That's what Rashi says in our Pasha. So this becomes a third idea of Achei Temimim. Animals' bodies were never dead. So in Kabbalah, the body of an animal is called tzemeach, and the neshama of an animal is called chai. The body of the animal is called like a plant, and the soul of the animal is what raises it from the plant level, from the vegetation level, to the dynamic, organic animal level. In the human case, the body was created as doimim. The body was created lower than the body of an animal. And the neshama is medaber, the soul. The word medaber is sometimes interpreted to mean that he's able to speak. The word medaber is alternatively interpreted to mean intelligent. The Yan V'Kocha, and the Rebbe Maharash gives you both options and explains each one. But the way Hashem made the human being is first he had a dead body, then he put a soul into it. So again it says, Achei Temimim. The body of a person is lower than the body of an animal. Because the body of an animal was never doimim. It was tzemeach from the moment it was created. The body of the human being was doimim. The neshama of the human being, vakedem, is higher than everything else because it was created from min ha'yayin, it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this contributes further. The Alter Rebbe asks the question, Lahavin atam. There's a mime in our Pasha Torah. We must understand the reason. Mipnei ma nishtana eifun yitzidas gufa adam. Why did Hashem make a change in how He formed the body of man? That He made the doimim, the body, from the lowest, and the soul from the highest. And in short, the answer is two things. A, we were given choices. We were given options. We could be the highest of the high, and we could be the lowest of the low, and it's our choice. B, we can encompass it all. Human beings were designed to get down to the lowest level and lift it up. The reason human beings are able to get down to the lowest level and lift that up is because there's a part of us which is the lowest thing. On the other hand, human beings have a part of themselves which is the highest thing. It says in Medrash, and it's quoted in Chassidus, that the meaning of the word Adam, the translation of the Hebrew word Adam, is min ha'yonim and min ha'tachtenim, from the highest and from the lowest. Human beings are created from the highest and the lowest. I gave you three different models. They were thought about first and created last. They have the possibility of being the highest and the possibility of being the lowest. Their body is the lowest, their soul is the highest. All of this contributes to the promise, to the prospect, to the possibilities that the Eibishter gave human beings in this earth. I'm sorry, Rabbi. Aleph Dam, you can excuse me. Aleph Dam, Azay steht in Chassidus. Dam is the guf, and Aleph is Pella, Ulfen of Alimud, Aleph Chachochma, Aluf Shaloilam. I just made that up, by the way. But I don't know. It says in Aymes, Aleph Dam. It says in Chassidus from the Shemagid, Aleph Dam. Okay, now Rabbi Yossi. So this is the beginning of this conversation. That man was made on Friday. He was made. Hashem thought about him first. He created him last. He's the point of the whole creation, as I said in the previous, whatever it is, 10, 15 minutes that I've been talking. But then we move on to something else. And that is, what is the definition of a human being? Now, this is really true. Okay, this is not something that was created by neo-Kabbalists in order to explain why Jewish people still believe in marriage, and that marriage has to mean between a man and a woman, and that people are supposed to stay married for the rest of their lives. This says in Kabbalah, this says in Zohar, this says in Medrash, and this really says in Chumash. In other words, this is part of the basic design of creation. Human beings and animals are fundamentally different for many reasons, and one of them is human beings are meant to be a man and a woman together. You don't get married for a reason. Marriage is the basic condition of a person. Period. Animals also get married. But for most animals, it depends on their way of life and the difficulties of their lives, they get married for one reason, to have children. If you're familiar with animals and with fish, I mean fish for sure, but birds, you understand that males and females get together to procreate and then they go their own separate ways. And usually the females raise the children alone. Now it's not so simple. There's all different kinds of cultures amongst animals, and depending on how hard their life is, for example, this is the ultimate example, birds, to raise a fledgling bird is very, very costly, it's very difficult. So birds were created by the Eibishter that the man and the woman raise the baby together. The man doesn't fly off after the egg is fertilized. The males and the females raise the babies together. If the birds live in a world where there is sufficient food and there's not so much danger, so then they have different relationships. But in the animal kingdom, males and females get married to have children. In the human family, males and females get together to be whole. Yes, one of the most, or perhaps the most important product of the union between a man and a woman is, Rashi says, a man leaves his father and his mother, and he becomes one with his wife. They become like one flesh, says Rashi, in the children. That's true. But the idea of is not only for children. It has to do with the basic design of Hashem made human beings. Okay, which leads us to a very important part of the creation story, regarding which there is so much confusion, and I want to clear it up. Okay? You all know, we learned it in Chitas, I guess yesterday, that the Eibishter performed the first operation. The first surgery was performed by God. What was the operation? Adam loy matza eze kenegde. Adam Rishon was lonely. Adam Rishon couldn't find happiness. Adam Rishon was unfulfilled. So vayapa the Shem Elokim tadei mal Adam. The Eibishter took an anesthesiologist, right? Malach anesthesia, and they plugged in Adam Rishon. They put him to sleep, and the Eibishter took a tzela, and he made from the tzela vayiven. That's a tzela. He built up the tzela. And by the way, the word of vayiven, Rashi says vayiven. He made her into a structure that's wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. Rashi says this, so she should be able to carry a baby, pregnancy. But in Chassidus, as vayiven atzatzela means he gave her bina. It's a Gemara. That's the source of this idea. Bina yeseirat nitna be'isha yesem be'ish is from this pasuk vayiven. Vayiven doesn't mean he built up. He wizened. He understanding. He gave bina yeseirat to Isha and the Eibush to create chava from Adam. Now the question is, how do you translate the word seila? So if you're giving me saying this, I don't know if you can blame this on the movies or on another religion whose name I don't want to mention in a shul, but it doesn't mean a rib. There's no such daya. It does a daya. Seila does not mean a rib. Period. The end. Just like the Eitz Hadas was for sure not an apple. There's four opinions about the Eitz Hadas: a fig, a wheat, a grape, an esrig. There is no opinion in Torah that it was an apple. And in all the movies, it's an apple. Okay? So the Seila is the same thing. There is no day in Torah. Seila means a rib. There's only two opinions in the Gemara. One opinion, which is interesting, is that it's vertebrae. In other words, Adam Rishon had a tail. And if you're familiar with this, the highest primates, that means gorillas and orangutans and gibbons don't have tails. Tails are very important for animals that live in trees for balance. So according to Rashi, they took off the tail, and from the tail he made vertebrae. There was enough bones to create chava. So why would the higher apes not have tails? So I'll say something which is going to absolutely blow your mind, and we're not going to discuss it. According to the Midrashim, there is backwards evolution. It's not that the chimpanzees became human beings, but that some human beings were punished and they became chimpanzees. Conversation we're not going to have, but it's a medrash. I didn't make this up. I didn't make it up. So there's an opinion that seila means ribs, vertebrae. Okay, it's not a rib, it's vertebrae. So the Eibush took away his tail, so he has no tail. So people have to deal with balance using other techniques, whatever the case may be. Okay, but there's another opinion. And that other opinion is the opinion that the Rashi prefers, and it's the opinion which almost all the Rishonim prefer. It's the opinion that Kabbalah brings, it's the opinion that Chassidus brings. In other words, it's the more likely interpretation of the word seila, and it's lost on people, and it makes me crazy. Seila means a side. Like Tzela HaMishkan. Seila means a side. And the Rashi says in Chumash, it's based on a Gemara, that Adam and Chava Yu Patzufim Nivru. That means Hashem did not make woman from man. That's a very big, basic misunderstanding. Hashem made man and woman together. When Hashem made people, they were a man and a woman attached physically. In other words, since I told you a few minutes before that the difference between the human species, I hate to use that word, lyhadus, and animals, is that animals don't necessarily have to be together in pairs. It's only necessary for purposes of procreation, and to look after their young, and to survive threats, and whatever other social reasons. But if an animal doesn't need to be with another animal, be alone. Hashem made people to be Zochar and Nekeva. And according to Rashi, and this is based on a Gemara, and this is the opinion which is found in Kabbalah, and this is the opinion which Chassidus talks about, man and woman are created as one. Adam doesn't mean man. Adam doesn't mean woman. Adam means person. There's a pasuk in the end of our Pasha, in the Chitas of Friday. This is the book of the story or of the actions of man. On the day that Hashem created the world, and then it says these words, Zachar u'nekeva b'ra'am. Male and female, he created them. Vayikra es shemam. He called their collective name. Not his name, not her name, their name. Adam. Adam is not male. Ish is male. And the opposite of Ish is Isha. Gever is male. The opposite of Gever is Gaveret or Giveret. Enosh is male, the opposite of Enosh is Anusha. Adam isn't male. Adam is male and female. And originally, Adam and Chava were created like Siamese twins. Why? Because this is what separates man from animal. On a fundamental level, human beings are designed for relationship. Okay, I'm going to use a word. It's the right word to use. I hope you don't misunderstand it. Human beings are created for intimacy, to be very close to another human being in their mind and their heart and in their soul. And the beginning of that is Zohar and Akeva. So, physically, Adam and Chava were created as one person like this, back to back. They shared the same spine. And the operation was to separate them. Okay, now the Gemara asks, no, so if Adam and Chava were created back to back, so who was pulling and who was pushing? Who went first and who went? And the Gemara brings a raya from a pasuk in Shoftim that Adam would walk and Chava would follow. Adam schlepped. I'm assuming that Adam was pushed bigger, and the male half of Adam was bigger than the female half of Adam, but they were one person, physically one person. And the Eibishter made an operation, separated them, so they're now two separate people, and they can have a relationship which is called face-to-face rather than back-to-back. Yes, sir?
So why was he lonely?
Oh, very good point. Very, very important point. If the clock will go slowly, I will answer your question. So in Kabbalah, it's described in this way. Very good. That's precise. That's the correct question to ask. The Kabbalah way to say this is Adam and Chava were created as Siamese twins, Ocher ba'ocher, back to back. They couldn't see each other. Unless they had mirrors, they couldn't see each other. It even says in Sfarim they could have had children, but they had no pneumistic relationship. Then he separated them. What happened? He separated them. You have two. Now, if you're carrying around your wife in your knapsack, and I hate to sound this way because I know how terrible that sounds, you have no problems. Wherever you go, she goes. Whatever you want, she wants, because she has no will. But you have no relationship with her. Hashem separates Adam from Chava, and then there's what's called panim upon face to face. But face to face means there's two people now with two minds, not one mind schlepping the other guy around. I have my mind, you have your mind. I have my desire, you have your desire. I have my will, you have your will. I have my feelings, you have your feelings. So the relationship is much more complicated. And that's what the Pasuk says, V'yas Eloi Ezer Kenegdei. When Hashem separates Adam from Chava, the downside is Chava is no longer going to do whatever Adam wants. She has her own mind. And now, based on the actions of Adam, based on the actions of Chava, they're either going to have a very deep relationship, which is called Ezer, where they're going to share things. Not they're going to share things because she's subservient to him, but because you have two minds, two hearts, two sets of senses that come together to create a family, to create a life. And if Chas v'Sholom it's combative and they don't get along, then it's Kenegdei, then it's not good. So the Eibishter made Adam and Chava as one in what seemed like the most easy marriage. Chava is going to be schlepped around by Adam Arishon, wherever Adam goes, Chava goes, no problems. And Rabbi Yossi Paltiel says, and Adam was unhappy. So the Eibishter says to Adam, really? Really? You want me to separate it from you? You want to deal with that? So I want to be able to talk to somebody. I want someone to be able to tell me when I make a mistake. I want someone to correct me. Yeah, what happens if you don't like what that other has to say? It's going to be harder, but it'll be much more meaningful. That's the pshat that Adam was not satisfied. He had a wife, but he didn't have a wife. There were no two. There was no partnership. There was no relationship. Hashem separates Adam from Chava, and instead of being Ocher b'Ocher, now upon him is a challenge. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to talk it over with your wife. You can't just do whatever you feel. You have to deal with her feelings. I saw a wonderful little thought from the Frierdiker Rebbe. And I feel the reason the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say it more, because you have to be a very special person for the Frierdiker Rebbe to tell this to you. There was a young couple who got married in 1949. The chassan's name was Shalom Berg Gordon. He has many grandchildren in this room. And the kala's name was Miriam Simpson. Shalom, Mrs. Rabbi and Rebbetzin Gordon. They were married in 1940, that means 72 years ago. They went into the Rebbe with their parents, the B'yechan and Olav Shalom and his wife, and Rabbi Simpson and his Rebbetzin. There's a quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe, not to them, but to a different couple. The Rebbe said, Ihr sollt haben Nachas eine von Zweiten, ihr sollt haben Nachas von sie beiden, und ich soll haben Nachas von euch allemen. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, you should have pleasure from one another, the husband and the wife. And then he said to the parents, and you should have nachas from the two of them, and I should have nachas from all of you. The Frierdiker Rebbe said. Ihr, the Chosen and Kaus, have nachas eine von zweiten, you should have nachas from one another. Ihr, the four parents, should have nachas from the two of them together, and I should have nachas from all six of you. The Rebbe was talking to Chassidim who were very close to him. When they went into that Yechidus, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to them, Miriam Gordon wrote it down, and she allowed it to be published, mamish, exactly when she passed away. And the Frierdiker Rebbe told her like this, everybody has ma'as and chasrenis. I'm not saying you shouldn't see the chasrenis in the person you marry, but the milas you should focus on, the chasrenis you shouldn't focus on. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe said, this is so powerful, is kein Zach nicht ton allein, never do anything alone. Alles durchreden zusammen, everything you'll ever do in your married life, everything you do in your life, discuss with one another. Do you imagine what kind of a couple, how special a couple it needs to be, that the Rebbe tells them before they get married, talk everything over. I once repeated this in a Fabrengen, not to Bocherim, to married people, and the ceiling came down. I can't tell my wife everything, my marriage will be over. The Rebbe said to a chosen and a kala, never do anything alone. The Eibishter made a man and a woman to come together and become one. Not that I don't have a mind and you don't have a mind. We talk everything over. We negotiate everything. We work everything out. This is very hard. And Adam preferred it. Adam preferred it. Adam preferred to have somebody he can talk to and to somebody he can schlep around like a sack of potatoes. This is like Ezer, if it works, it's the best thing in the world. The Gemara says, Motzah and Motzah. If you have a marriage and the marriage works, that's the greatest thing in the universe. If you have a marriage and the marriage doesn't work, it's Gehenna on earth. It's the worst thing. You're so close to another human being. The way the Eibishter made it, it's supposed to be two people coming together. Go ahead.
Why did Hashem make them back to back?
In the beginning.
No, because in all of Bria, this seems like the only thing where Hashem didn't get it right on the first try.
He absolutely got it right on the first try. The reason the Eibush did it this way is because since he wants man and woman to become so connected, like they're physically one, he made them physically one and separated them. By making them physical initially, he gave the koyach that even though they're two, they should be so united in the biblical terms. They should be one flesh, one goof. The only way that's possible is by first making them one, and then separating, and now when they join together, they never become one goof again. They become one goof in their mind, their heart, and their spirit, and their nefesh, and their neshama. Let me say this to you in simple psychological terms. You'll understand it very simply. Okay? Everybody in the world has weaknesses. Almost everybody has weaknesses. Everybody in the world has phobias. Everybody in the world has mishgassen. Okay? And everybody in the world wants to look good. So what do? You hide parts of yourself. If I'm afraid of, elevators, I just make sure never to be around people when there's an elevator that needs to be rode. I figure it out. If I'm afraid of airplanes, I come up with some... We all find ways of protecting ourselves. What happens? We don't change. We don't grow. We don't overcome our mishagas. And the same is true in Midas Nefesh. Some people have anger in their personality. Some people have jealousy in their personality. Some people have natural fear in their personality. Some people are very jealous. Some people are very lustful. Some people need to have pleasure all the time. We all have midos that are by themselves not bad, but when they're taken to an extreme, they're terrible. Right? The chitas of these days is called akoyes ki'ilu eved avedzara. Getting angry is a terrible midah. The Rebbe is going to say sometimes you have to act angry, not feel angry, but act angry. But otherwise, getting angry is a terrible midah. If a person has anger, the easiest way to hide that anger is never to be in a place where he is vulnerable that he'll plot, that he'll lose control. What happens in a marriage? Being married is like living in a room with mirrors on top and on bottom, right, left, front, back, and the mirrors have cracks. And every mirror shows you distorted, disfigured. Being married means living your life in front of a mirror, but not a smooth mirror that shows you a perfect reflection of yourself. A cracked mirror that shows you distorted versions of yourself. Because when you get married, you can't hide. And chas v'sholem, And I say this advisedly. A couple gets married and they try to hide their chassidus from one another, so you should know then they're not married. A guy once said to me, Rabbi, everybody in Manhattan is single. I said to him, nobody in Manhattan is married. He says, no, they're married, but they're single. I said, what does that mean? He says, they're not married. I said, so they're married. In other words, marriage doesn't mean you put a ring on a finger and you live in the same apartment. Marriage means that you come together. And if two people live in a house and they don't come together, that's not marriage. And if they're going to come together, every chassadim you have, your wife is going to know. Every chassadim your wife has, you're going to know. And the way marriage works is that not only you accept the chassidus of the person, you help them heal them, you help them grow, and you even learn to enjoy, to appreciate the things of the other person which are not perfect. That's the psychology of the basar echad. Psychology of basar echad. Two people get married, nobody's perfect. Trust me. Nobody's perfect. Every midah you have, every fear you have, every mishigas you have will come out. You're not going to hide from your wife. And you don't want to hide from your wife. If you have to hide from your wife, then you don't have a marriage. And your wife shouldn't hide from you. The basar echad is two people who are mesaken each other. They help heal each other, grow each other up. In other words, animals have midas rayos. They're supposed to have midas rayos. A lion who kills and eats feels bad. He doesn't live. Finished. A lion comes to a carcass, and there are animals that are smaller than him or weaker than him that just killed an animal, and he takes it away. He says, oh, I'm a ganav. He doesn't have a conscience. He's an animal. Human beings have a right and a wrong. They have a conscience. They have a sense of what's true and what's false and what's important, what's not important, and what's right and what's wrong, the sense of justice. A couple who lives together brings the best out of each other. You help each other grow up. And that's part of the reason why the Eibishter made us the way He made us, that we're created. You partzufim nivru, that's Lashon Gemara. Adam and Chava are two halves of one body that then were separated and never rejoined, that they become one flesh again, but rejoined in what's called panim bepanim, two minds, two hearts, two souls, two sets of senses that now have to build together. It's much more difficult, but it's so much more deep, it's so much more meaningful, and this is what Adam Rishon wanted. This is why Adam Rishon was unhappy, and this is why when the Eibishter made this operation, Adam Rishon was happy. He had Chava before, he had the same Chava after. The difference was only that before Chava was not separate from Adam, so there's no connection, no meaningful connection. And after Chava became an entity unto herself, they had a more meaningful relationship. And of course, you know, and it's brought in Chassidus, that the Rebbe says in many sikhs, that the Zohar actually says that neshamas in Gan Eden are paired. I don't want to go into the whole arichas, but Gilgal neshamas is only for male neshamas. Every neshama that comes from Gan Eden into this world is two, male and female. And when those two neshamas come into this world, they're like Adam and Chav before the Nesida. They're actually one. And then they're separated. They're born into different families, sometimes different parts of the world. And then many, many, many years later, the Eibishter mezavek zivugim and brings them together, which is why the Lashon HaZohar is an unmarried person is palga gufa. There's a half a body. But the gufa in this case doesn't mean a physical body, it means half of Atzilus. Atzilus is called gufa. Palga gufa means you're either male or female of Atzilus. Atzilus is Zohar and Achei. So the Zohar says that even though the bodies were separated once, it's not like all of us are born male and female and then there's an operation to separate us. Only Adam and Chava were created that way. On the neshama level, every soul that comes into this world in each and every Gilgal is a pair of a Zohar and a Nekeva. They're separated and then they're rejoined. When the Eibishter arranges, the Eibishter mezavek zivugim, they should be able to get married. Now, I don't have any more time. I just want to say one thing very, very quickly. And like I said, I had prepared a whole speech. I left my notes at home, so I really gave you quite a different speech than the one I prepared. There is a creature in Jewish mythology, in Midrash Chazal, in Zohar, that's called Lilis, Lamed Yud Tov. And there are midrashim to the effect that Adam married Lilis. There was Chava, there was Lilis, it's a whole story. I don't have time to give you the long version of Lilis. I planned on it, but it didn't work out. I just want to tell you my opinion on Lilis. Lilis is Chava. It's not a different woman. But it's Adam and Chava when they had a relationship that was not complete. They had a relationship. They were married. They had children. But their minds were not aligned. Their hearts were not aligned. Their senses were not aligned. So basically, Adam and Chava were a male and a female living like animals. And it says in the Midrashim that the children that came from that union were sick. They were not healthy children. After 130 years, whatever the reasons are, Adam and Chava grew up, however you explain it, and they got married. They were married for 130 years, but they got married means they went back to having the kind of relationship that the Eibishter planned for Adam and Chava to have. And then it says, Vayeled b'tzalmei kedmusei, that a son named Sheis, and Sheis was in the image of Adam and Chava because, not because they got married, but because their marriage was on all levels. On the mind level, on the heart level, on the senses level. When two people are married and they hate each other, the children are full of anger. Lilis is not a different person. Lilis is Chava in a messed up relationship. And again, if I had more time, I can explain it to you. I can even bring what I think is proof to this position. After 130 years, Adam and Chava graduated, they grew up, they did tshuva from Eitzadas, whatever the position is. Yeah, but Shadim is human beings. They were human beings who were sick, and their descendants ended up in the Mabul. You understand? You understand? That's how I'm teaching it. And after 130 years, however Adam and Chava healed, they became a married couple, which means that they were connected on all levels, so they had a healthy child. Okay? And we're out of time. 1 second, everyone, 1 second. Double Shlomo, say your comment quickly.
Yeah. So you're saying that there are such things as soulmates?
Absolutely. I'll be tired, yeah. But it's also possible to mess it up, to lose it. There's all kinds of things that can happen. It's very tricky and complicated. There's a letter from the Rebbe about it, actually. Okay, Ma'ariv.